All right, peeps, on today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius and I will be critiquing online Wing Chun video. Lots of gems, lots of BIU Sunim Tao, and lots of, hey, have you seen that secret anti-grab defense in the knife form? Only I can teach you. Let's get to it!
And every day, I practice martial arts. Watch out!
Yo, Mikey, how you doing, man?
Doing great, Seagung. How are you?
I'm actually quite chill, lounging here on the couch instead of in a chair for a change.
Yeah. No, I see you got the whole kind of, it's almost like a chaise lounge vibe you've got going.
Yeah,
there, you know what I mean?
I'm only missing the bathrobe, and then it would be perfect.
I'm glad that you are missing the bathrobe. We've been close for a while. Like, there's still limits to where we should go with this. You know what I mean?
Yes. So the reason why we have the couch in front of our bookshelf is because I just bought a new couch for my apartment. For people who don't live in New York City, they don't understand like what a pain in the butt getting new furniture is, because you got to get it up to see. If you're in an old building that doesn't have an elevator, the delivery people got to bring it. It's like a huge production. And so with old furniture, you either just put it on the street so someone will take it, or you try to sell it. And I have a lot of interest in this old couch. And so I didn't feel like just putting it out on the street for someone to take it. I figured I could get a couple bucks for it. And so as a result, I have an extra couch in my apartment, of which, if anyone knows what a New York apartment is like, is not an easy thing to manage. New York apartments are, while expensive, not spacious.
No. I mean, look, if I had space in my, the end room where I would do all my music and stuff, I would happily take that couch off
It's an
your
awesome,
hands.
and it turns into a bed. So, hey.
Oh my God,
Yes.
it would be perfect.
Yes,
but I got too much crap in
All
there.
right. Well, move some of your crap and take it off my
but
hands,
I really,
please.
really like it.
All right. But anyway, let's get things moving before people go, hey, what are they talking about furniture for? So here we are for another episode of the Kung Fu Genius. What are we even doing today?
Something a little different.
Oh, you know, it's so funny. I forgot what we were working on. And then it's like, yes, of course.
I hope that's the reminder, because the thing about it is that we're doing something a little different, but I don't know exactly how to word it. Like,
Right.
what it is, it's like kind of, not what we would do differently or how we would do something.
I think, to phrase it more positively, is what can we learn?
Ah,
Okay?
yes, that's it. What can we learn?
So I often get people asking me to react to other videos, especially those within the field of Wing Chun, right? Now, I generally don't like doing that, because I think that that is the trend. I mean, maybe that is what we need to do to get more eyeballs to our channel, because the moment you react to something, especially if it's perceived as being negative in the thumbnail or whatever, people are going to click on that. We know, we've talked about it for so long. Anytime a topic seems like it's going to be a little ranty or negative, like if I discuss William Chung or anyone else, even if the episode itself is fair and balanced, people perceive it as being, oh no, they're going to talk ish about a certain topic, right?
Yeah.
And so it's certainly not my wish to say like, hey, look at these Wing Chun videos out there, and look how wrong these guys are. Or they're doing something totally stupid or totally wrong or totally whatever, because I think there's a lot of that in the YouTube sphere, on Reels and stuff like that. And so it's just that we get this request so much, like, hey, KFG, what do you think about this guy's videos or whatever? And I don't like to talk publicly about what I think about other Wing Chun Sivus. I find it like maybe not the best. It's not even a topic that interests me that much per se, but it seems like the audience is interested in it. So rather than spin it as something negative, like, oh, I'm going to bash these videos, I'm going to discuss, is there something we can learn from how we do, from how someone else does it? Or is this an interpretation issue? And why do certain groups within, let's say, WT, the specific lineage of Wing Chun that I'm from, why does it seem like certain groups like to interpret certain things a certain way? And maybe talk more about those things. I'd almost rather talk about where these different interpretations stem from, because I'm a history nerd. So when Wing Chun is presented in a certain way by European instructors, and students who learn from me or learn from other instructors who teach Hong Kong style WT, they look at some of the, European stuff. And I'm not talking necessarily about the EWTO and magic hands and that stuff, which is already different. I'm talking about people who are claiming to teach some form of Leung Ting Wing Chun WT, whether more classical or modern or whatever. I want to discuss, like, to students who learn Hong Kong Wing Chun, the Hong Kong style of Leung Ting's association or teachings, I should say. My students often look at those videos and they're very confused because the framework for which the Wing Chun is explained by a lot of these, I call them Latter-day Saints in Europe, is couldn't be more different from what I teach. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
you know, the Latter-day Saints is like you had your OGs in the religion, and then, you know, a couple thousand years later, you're finding gold plates in the woods, and then there's news stories being spun out of this old stuff, right? And I feel that sometimes some of these European instructors have their own little bubble of how they see things, and it's totally fine. If that framework works, they can teach it to other people. Those students can apply it. It makes sense. It's logical. It's a complete worldview. More power to them. What I'm here to do is say, does this general worldview jibe with how the art is presented in a more original form? And I'm not saying original means better or worse. I'm just saying, like, at some point, the Wing Chun, the WT style came from Sifu Leung Ting, and he taught this to a bunch of people. And now, 40, 50 years later, we have all these guys online talking and telling you what Wing Chun, meaning WT, is. And they're doing it in a kind of a somewhat authoritative tone.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the question is, how did we get from what Sifu Leung Ting taught to what is being presented by some of these guys?
Right. So to clarify, we are just literally talking about WT here, not WC.
Yes. I think it's would be harder to address versions outside of my lineage, because if I say anything somewhat critical, it may come off as being tribal, whereas maybe my critique is just on how the thing is explained or something. Also, for example, if I were to look at some different videos of people who taught Wong Sun Leung Wing Chun, well, not being a Wong Sun Leung Wing Chun guy myself, I don't know what the standard is in terms of, like, okay, this is how the late Wong Sifu did it, and these are how his students do it, and this is what's being interpreted now as Wong Sun Leung Wing Chun. Like, I'm not schooled enough in those details to say it for another style. So
Right.
if I said something that sounded negative, some people might say, oh, well, you're just saying that this style of Wing Chun is not as good as yours, and that's not what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to say that here. I'm not trying to say the way I interpret Sifu Leung Ting's Wing Chun is better than what anyone that we're going to talk about is. You know, I'm not saying that what I do is better. I'm just saying I had the rare opportunity to learn both in Europe at the castle from the top EWTO guys, whether it was Sifu Heinrich Buff or Bernd Wagner, Thomas Schrön, all of those guys, not to mention the late Sifu Kanspech. So having that intense closeness to that source, I have a pretty good idea of what the EWTO taught as Leung Ting Wing Chun, you know, especially in the older days. Then I was a private student of Sifu Leung Ting for 9 years, training both at my school in New York, privately in Hong Kong, instructor classes, and with other Hong Kong instructors, Sifu Carson Lau, Sifu Cheng Chun Fan, the late Sifu Leung Kun. So I think I'm kind of in a unique position to be able to compare, like, this is what's taught in Europe, and this is what the Hong Kong guys teach as WT.
Yeah.
And then seeing where the differences are and where the misinterpretations from, how did you get from this, let's say, German interpretation and to the Hong Kong one? Now, when I say German interpretation, I'm not necessarily talking about what the EWTO is doing. I'm talking about people who claim just WT. They're not part of the EWTO. They're just people that say, okay, the Wing Chun that they teach is a Leung Ting derivative, even if they spell it WC or VT or whatever for marketing purposes. They're somehow making a claim that they're teaching some Leung Ting derivative Wing Chun.
Right.
All right. So I'm talking about those guys. I'm not talking about what the EWTO does. I'm talking about these people often, but not always. They give themselves the gold stripes. So, of course, they're grandmasters. They're going to tell you everything that is evil and ill in the EWTO. And then they're going to turn around, give themselves the gold stripes, call themselves Dai Sifu or whatever ridiculous title, and then talk about the ills of the association, for which they're basically copying straight out of the playbook, only the negative things that they don't like, right?
Right.
So I'm talking about, and I call them the Latter-day Saints of WT in Europe. Okay, they're the Joseph Smiths of the Wing Chun world, right? They come later. They found these gold plates in the woods that tell you everything about what real Hong Kong Wing Chun is. No one knows where these gold plates came from because they cannot produce a direct connection to having learned from Sifu Leung Ting. And I'm not saying learning from Sifu Leung Ting makes anyone special. It's just if you're making a claim that WT is this and not this, and they're making very strong, authoritative sounding claims, then we can say, okay, well, if we don't see your connection to some Chinese guy in WT, then we're only going to have to vet the claims that you say compared to what those guys teach. All right, because there's no evidence to suggest this is coming from any of those Chinese guys.
Yeah.
There's only evidence it's coming from some German guy, often in Buxtehude. Do you know Buxtehude?
I do not know Buxtehude.
Buxtehude is a German town, but in Germany, you say someone is from Buxtehude when you're basically saying, like in English, we would say BFE or Bum F Egypt, or someone is from Pennsylvania, you know. So you make like when someone's from nowhere, like a little village that no one knows, you're from Buxtehude,
some podunk right? town in
exactly right. Although they're not always from some podunk town, sometimes they're from some very big German towns. But this doesn't make what they're saying any more authoritative. So I thought maybe we'll discuss that. But before we get started, just wanted to remind everyone that the best way to support the Kung Fu Genius is on Patreon. Patreon.com/the Kung Fu Genius for all your Kung Fu Genius needs. For as little as $5 a month, you can get access to episodes early. Higher tiers of support have all sorts of goodies, cool things. And if you don't want to support us on Patreon, you can support us right here on YouTube in memberships. We have a couple tiers for that. And the highest tier will even include some special videos, which is another thing that we're going to do and use this video as a jump off point. I don't really want to make open videos talking about other Wing Chun Sifu's techniques or critiquing it or perceiving that I'm being critical to be a jerk on purpose. Right? Because for me, I'm a bit of a scientist. Okay.
Yeah. Ooh.
And
I would say that's a Freudian slip, but the Scientologists would disagree with such.
Yes. Yeah. There are no Freudian slips because there is no Freud. He was a fraud.
He was a fraud.
And maybe perhaps it's more scientistic than scientific. But I don't want to be here just going like, oh my God, how does this guy think that this is how Bong Sao is taught in Leung Ting Wing Chun or whatever? Because I think that that's a little crass. But I will do it privately for our YouTube and Patreon members. But I do promise for those who maybe you're watching this video because I'm talking about your videos, like you're not being personally targeted here. It's everything that I'm going to talk about is going to be from a professional standpoint, from like, okay, I learned from Sifu Leung Ting and other Chinese instructors. This guy is claiming that the framework of Chinese Wing Chun or WT is insert whatever their claim is. And does that comport with what I learned? Which, by the way, doesn't make them right or wrong. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I can also be wrong. My interpretation is also my own. I'm just comparing it as someone who learned Wing Chun in Germany, but then also learned the Chinese way to people who only learned in Europe and then claiming some knowledge of the Chinese way, to which I can only assume they found those gold plates in the woods.
Yeah.
That's why I call these guys the Latter-day Saints. Okay.
Right.
Because unless they go like, oh, here's a bunch of photos where I followed Sifu Leung Ting for 5 years at some point, or I was a private student of his or whatever, or I learned this from another ex-student of Sifu Leung Ting or some Chinese guy or whatever. Unless that is forthcoming, then my default position is they only learned Wing Chun in Europe and they're making some claims based on what they learned in Europe, maybe not knowing that that's not exactly how the Chinese interpret it, right?
Yeah.
Hey everyone, just want to let you know Wing Chun Illustrated is now offering a paperback edition through Amazon, reaching a larger global market. And no, they're not ditching the glossy magazine edition through MagCloud. You can now simply choose the version of this magazine you prefer and the one with the cheapest shipping wherever you live. Order your copy of Wing Chun Illustrated today across 12 Amazon marketplaces with free shipping for Prime members. Go and check that out.
So that was kind of my long throat clearing. So for anyone whom I decide to critique or do my spin on your videos, even though those videos are going to be, private just for our members, it's not because I'm bashing them behind closed doors or it's not a passive aggressive thing. It's just that the general audience prefers this stuff. The specific audience, like on Patreon, they want to know the nitty gritty of, okay, bonks, is this way of bonks or paxao passable or whatever, right? For the general YouTube videos, I will normally just discuss things in general.
Of course.
Mhm. All right, so here we go. So, and by the way, I had put a list on Instagram. I said, hey, are there any Wing Chun Sivus within the WT world that you want me to talk about or discuss their videos so I can see how it comports with how I learned WT? And this one came up first. And this is a guy named Cord Elsner. Cord, C-O-R-D.
C-O-R-D.
Elsner. Okay. And he's a German guy. All right. I don't know much about him in my years training in Germany. In the late 90s, early 2000s, I never heard of him. I mean, which doesn't say, look, the EWTO is a huge organization. I'm going to assume, just based on the way he moves, that he at some point was either a member of the EWTO or he had learned from someone who was in the EWTO, because that it generally looks like where he comes from. I don't know anything about his past. But I don't remember Sifu Leung talking about this guy. I don't remember seeing him in Hong Kong. And I never heard of him, but for people sending me his videos, right?
Yeah.
And so I figured, why don't we do the first episode about him? All right, and kind of discuss some of my, I suppose, my observations. So I watched some of his videos. I recently watched some of them in preparation for this episode. I had I think about it 1 or 2 years ago. I was you ever been held hostage at someone's house and they kind of start making you watch a bunch of videos, all right? And I know that's happened because that's happened here to you.
Absolutely.
Well, I probably held you hostage and made you watch stuff.
Well, I've held the other person hostage myself.
What do you think? What do you think? Watch. No, don't look away. Watch. All right. And it's just videos of me, right? Staring at the camera, right? So I have a friend. He's a Wing Chun guy, and he spends a lot of time watching these kind of videos. And he also learns from me, right? So his thing is like, wow, how can this guy say this? It should be this or whatever. And I'm always like, hey, look, there are different interpretations. You know my interpretation because you're learning it from me. And so that's your framework, all right? So something that's different is not wrong because it's different from what you do. Things are either right or wrong based on their merits, okay? So it's possible to like the way I teach Wing Chun, but there also be other frameworks of Wing Chun which are also good and positive and effective, okay? It's just that we're very binary humans. It's either right or wrong. I like my Sifu, so I like the way they teach it, so any way that's different is wrong. And I don't want that vibe to come up. It's like these are different frameworks. All we're doing is evaluating the arguments,
right?
Okay, it's not a personal thing. It's not a matter of like, okay, but he takes it like really personally, and so he made me watch a lot of these videos.
Yeah.
And after about the second one, I kind of felt like, yeah, I've heard all of these arguments before, and this way of explaining, it's a very it's almost a reactionary EWTO. A reactionary to the EWTO framework, okay? The EWTO being like the first to bring Leung Wing Chun to Europe and being the source for most of these people originally. And then at some point they break away and then they're going to tell you all the ills with how the EWTO does stuff or everything that's wrong and bad about them and how they, of course, have the solution to that, right?
Yeah.
And one of those is like, showing like, oh, well, a lot of people think, WT is this and this, but actually it's this and this. And that's what we're looking to vet here a little bit. So one of the things that I remember when this friend of mine made me watch a bunch of these videos a while ago, at some point I was like, you have to turn it off for 2 reasons. One, nothing personal. I really don't consume a lot of Wing Chun on YouTube. I do Wing Chun from morning to night. I train it. I teach it. I write about it. I think about it. I am constantly working Wing Chun in my head. And I don't really have a lot of time to sit there and watch a lot of takes on it. And so it's one thing, like I don't consume a lot of that. The other thing too is if I want to find out about something, I always go to the top people. All right. So if I want to find out something about Wong Sun and Wing Chun now, or years after the great Wong Sun Leung passed away, I'm going to look at Wong Sun Leung's top guys. Okay, I'm going to look at David Peterson or Cliff Ao Young or someone, right? Jerry Young, people who are kind of prominent in that style, and I'm going to look at their videos and to see if whatever they are showing is usually closer to what that source I'm looking for, right? So because I learned at the EWTO headquarters and learned from all the top guys from the EWTO, and then also had learned and taken some private lessons from Sifu Kanshpe, and then also learned from Sifu Leung Ting and Cheng Chun Fan and Carson Lau and all these top guys. I'm not that interested in what some WT guy in Buxtehude shows. All right. And by the way, I'm not saying Cord Elsner's from Buxtehude. All right.
Yeah.
I think he's from Berlin. So pretty major city.
Absolutely.
I'm just saying in general, like, if I'm going to dedicate any time to watch this stuff, it's got to be someone who's above my pay grade in terms of their experience.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, there's a little bit of a genetic fallacy in there because if someone is right, they're right, regardless of whether they're more senior than you or they learn from this guy or not that guy, right? But it's just because my time is so limited. If I want to get some takes on a certain style of Wing Chun, I go to that person, that source. I don't go to their very many third party substitutes.
Yes,
Okay. I mean,
absolutely.
for me that it doesn't make any sense. Right. So one of the things that I noticed when I was watching some of these videos, and I'm going to frame this in a way that I'm not calling him out specifically on this.
Mhm.
The reason why is because the things that I'm going to talk about are not just things that I see Cord Elsner do. They're things that I see a lot of these Latter-day Saints do. They're the same talking points, sometimes repackaged. All right. Now, the first thing is not really a talking point. It's like a little pet peeve of mine, which is the made up Chinese terminology.
Right.
Okay. So this is a very common thing. All right. This is part of the reason why I went through great pains to learn as much about the Cantonese language as I could to make sure that I wasn't making those kind of common errors about how to pronounce something or what this thing actually means. When you're divorced from the source language, all right, all of the Wing Chun terms sound super exotic, all right? And if you just have the right translation or the right meaning, all your fist fighting is going to improve because you know the real definition of these movements. Now, my problem with some of this guy's videos is the same problem that I've seen with other similar Latter-day Saints. Okay.
Yeah.
They think that because they know the definition or the basic translation of some Chinese terms, that they can then paste them together, create a new term that means something, and then use it. Okay.
Right.
And they're doing this not because they heard some Chinese person use their term. They are deciding, I know, for example, he uses the term BIU-FAAK, like BIU-G and FAAK like a BIU-FAAK. All right. Because there's a lot of confusion, I think, in Europe in terms of the BIU-G form, in terms of the difference between FAAK-SAO, Satgang-SAO, the throat cutting hand, and the BIU-G-SAO. There's three similar movements, BIU and FAAK and the Satgang-SAO, right? And when people don't know these things, they start to create some word salad. And the thing is, you can't do that. Now, this thing also is problematic in reverse. I remember, all right, you know, when you have, like when you went to school and there was someone from another country, what's the first thing you ask them? Oh, how do you say bad words in their language, right?
Absolutely.
So, you know, when there's a German exchange student at an American high school, okay, so what are all the American students going to ask? And say, oh, how do you say this? How do you say this, right? And then because everyone wants to learn the bad words first, right?
As an aside, I'd say that that's the best way to learn a language.
Yes.
Start off with the curse words.
Start off with the curse and work your way back. Yes.
Every time.
So now, of course, what do some American kids do when some German guys there in school and they want to learn all these terms? They ask for the translation of words that they would use in English.
Oh, yeah. I made this mistake once.
And then they
had my
just
head kicked in.
use the German words in that place. So, for example, a common one is they'll go like, you know, what is shit? Okay, it's Scheiße, right? Scheiß, right? Shit, right? And then what is head? Kopf. Oh, Scheißkopf, shit head. All right. And then they're like, oh yeah, they're calling people Scheißkopf. But the thing is, Germans don't use the phrase shithead.
Yeah.
It's a uniquely English phrase, right? Hey, you shithead, come over here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't just take those two words in German, translate the English into German, and then use it in German as if that makes sense in German. You understand what I'm saying?
Oh no, absolutely. It's the difference between like saying shithead in French would be merde tête, but it's actually tête de la merde, a head of shit.
A head of shit,
right?
yes.
Now, as I was kind of just almost accidentally interrupted your flow earlier, when I was a kid and I used to be able to speak fluent French, one of the first things I wanted to learn was the term off, right? Check that so I can know when to bleep that out. Beep, beep. And I'm not going to say I'm not going to say what the actual French term is on here because
we'll get demonetized in France.
We might get demonetized in France, but also the point being is that it's the literal translation in French, right? So like, what does this in French, right? However, kind of like saying the C word over here, if you tell someone that in France, they get very, very upset. Right. So the difference between like, oh, f off, mate, you know what I mean? Like, which I can say to you or tons of other friends, right? As a kid, I said that to a couple of people who I thought they were friends, and they were like, they squared up and they were like, so what are you saying? And I was like, whoa. And I had to explain that that's how we.
Right. It's a term of endearment.
Term of endearment. This is how we speak in English. But the thing is, it's not that's the closest translation. It's not the literal translation. You know.
Got it. Yeah. So I feel that some of this goes on with some of these German guys where they just go like, I know what BUG means and I know what FAAK means, so I'm going to call it a BIU-FAAK. And it's not like this is coming from Siva Leungtang or some Chinese source. But then the other thing is, not only is this term made up. Now, look, you can, and I'm not saying he cannot make up his own terms or say in his association or his school, the BIU-FAAK is XYZ. All right. That's totally fine. I'm just saying, like, on the Chinese side of things, it just sounds kind of weird. All right. To kind of create terms. And then on top of that, there's an entire corpus of theory that is then attached to this essentially made up term. And there's like, oh, and then the BIU-FAAK, it's this and this and this. And you have all these rules. And he likes to put slides and lots of text on there. And then, which makes everything seem like it has a lot more weight. Like, oh, here are the 5 things about the BIU-FAAK or whatever. And so what happens is it's just like kind of, you see like how these ideas, like almost like religion, are made in real time.
Yeah.
There's an idea. Then there are all these like latter day accretions. Then there's a mythology built to it. And then there's how it ties in with the other stuff. And because humans are pattern seeking primates, it's so easy to then see, and then the BIU-FAAK ties in with this or what. And then it becomes that It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia meme about the conspiracy theory. He's there on the whiteboard and you see, and when I watch some of Cord's videos, it just feels like that meme from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where it's like, look, the bong sao is so easy because then you have the bong here from Sunam Tao, but then in the Chumkyu, it adds this dimension. But then later in the Buji, it's connected here. And then once you have the long pole, you have the long pole bong sao. And then the knife bong sao then comes in this way. And you start to go like, well, this is an overly bloated way of looking at Wing Chun from my perspective. All right. He has like a lot of, with little terms, he's created like a Tolkien novel on BIU-FAAK, which has its own world and side characters. You see what I mean? And then you're like, wow, this is like a lot of extra fiction for, what's essentially a throat cutting hand.
Yes, absolutely.
That's like literally what it is. So my issue is that I think that when people want to use these terms, and look, we can always get them wrong. I mean, I've been wrong on terminology before. It's a thing that can happen. But I would be a lot less confident talking about something that I wasn't as sure about or something that I know that I made up versus something that I knew and I was solid on, right? If I created something within my own association, like a couple exercises and drills, I'll always be very transparent. This is how I teach it, which is different from the traditional way. I'm not going to create a mythology about what I do and then just claim it as, oh, it's always been that way and then insert a bunch of terminology to support it, right? As Dr. Kenneth J likes to tell me, the plural of anecdotes is not data, right? So just kind of adding all cool terminology and stuff like this doesn't support that this is the thing.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of Wing Chun people would be better served if they just said, this is how I teach it based on my experience,
Right.
rather than say, this is how it is, and then introduce some terms that outside of their own school don't exist in the Chinese WT world. My issue is always with the claims. Where's this info coming from? If it's just coming from your own experience, I would like to hear that more, because a lot of what it sounds like is that this is the info he got on the magical gold plates that only he found.
Right.
He doesn't need to tell you what his source is because it's on the magical gold plates. Can I see the magical gold plates? No, only I can see the magical gold plates. So I always just feel like if you want to do your own brand of something, own it, bro. Be like, this is how I teach Bong Sao in my association. It is not the same as how Sifu Leung Ting or the EWTO or whatever does it. And the reason is because I base it on this, this, and this. Okay, great. Now, whatever you say after that is on you and on the merits of it. But there's no implied argument that this is how it is in Wing Chun.
Right.
And that this is some kind of irrefutable idea or authoritative, and when these sources are not forthcoming.
I mean, I agree with 100%.
You better, or otherwise I'm going to call you a Scheisskopf.
What, more than you usually do? I mean, it's back to that whole William Chung idea of like, kind of just like, allegedly he's this secret, the secret version of Wing Chun, when he could just have said, hey, no, this is why, and he's right.
As I've said many times, had he just said, hey, look, I was a student of Grandmaster Yip Man. I was a training partner to Bruce Lee. I was present in many of those early challenge fights, which had forged the reputation for Wing Chun in Hong Kong. He's got the fighting experience. He's got the credentials. And then he just says, he just said, and I find limitation in Wing Chun, or I found limitation in the Wing Chun I had learned, and I chose to solve the footwork bridging the gap issue with raising the leg and firing a BIU on the way in, or put more of an emphasis on going to the blind side or whatever. And he just said, this is my Wing Chun interpretation. This really is William Chung's Wing Chun. I think more people, or a whole lot more people, would have way less of an issue with it. The problem is always the claim, whether it's a direct claim, as in the case of William Chung, or it's kind of implicit, it's smuggled in that I'm telling you how Wing Chun is, all right? And then having these hyper-specific terms and theories, which are only propagated in the videos of these like Latter-day Saints and not in what you would call mainstream WT, without saying, this is my interpretation of it.
I mean, just say, bearing in mind that someone of that like level with those credentials still went ahead and kind of allegedly made up a story, right? Could the argument be made that, and I think not necessarily that it's like something that's in the minds of these people is like kind of, calculated, but it's sort of endemic in kind of martial arts in general, especially like kind of traditional Chinese martial arts.
Mm-hmm.
But like in WT, where like, you split off from the big, huge, behemoth of like the EWTO or some other like, organization or whatever, and you have to feel like you have to separate yourself a little bit,
Yes.
And instead of just being like teaching it practically, which immediately takes out the mystique of why some people or maybe in the minds of I mean, look, honestly, I remember when I first came and joined your school, I was like, I had this brief moment where I was just like, this is very practical.
Right.
And I kind of, which I ended up really, really appreciating. But like initially I was kind of like expecting a little more woo-woo hippie stuff about the forms, right?
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah, you came to the wrong place if you came to me. If you want woo-woo and chakras and stuff, you're in the wrong place.
The thing is, I wanted everything that I ended up getting,
Right.
but like, for some reason, I do remember, I think probably, I'm going to blame my mum for this and all of her Tai Chi nonsense from back in the day, but like, there was an element of me where I was like a little disappointed that it was a little bit less like all the practical stuff, absolutely, but a little bit less mystical around the forms.
Right. More
Until I
pragmatic.
found until I found out that basically all the forms are literally practical.
Right. Right.
I'm just like, oh, so that makes sense, right? So, but I think there's probably a lot of people that want to like really kind of buy into that stuff. You know what I mean?
No, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, I mean, when you break away from the big organization, you have to do things differently, right? I also did the same thing. All right? When I broke away from Sifu Leung Ting's organization, my main thing was, and it took me a few years to get it and a few false starts. You know, how can I run an association kind of free of what was corrosive about Leung Ting's organization? And I tried to just improve the model for the first few years until I realized the fish rots at the head.
Right.
I have to have a completely different way of how do I organize my schools, my curriculum, my relationships with students, also with students who are not part of my association. That stuff needs to be done in a much more progressive and much more professional way without all the weird tribal nonsense, right? But it took me a few years because, you know, you're trying to like improve the model you had learned.
Yeah.
And then at some point you might go, maybe the model is faulty and I need to redo it. And it took me a few years to realize I couldn't improve the IWTA's model because it's built in terms of how the association is run, because it's built in a problematic way.
Right.
So I needed to just throw that out and do it in a completely different way, where basically I look at what a lot of my competitors do when they copy the big associations and then use that as a playbook to just do the opposite of whatever they're doing.
Absolutely.
Right? So I get it why they want to go away and do their own thing. For me, my brand that's different from the big associations is you can learn Leung Ting Wing Chun, whatever you want to call it, Hong Kong Wing Chun, practical, you know, Hong Kong style Wing Chun, whatever you want to call it, but without all the diva drama that you get in the associations, right? Also that I teach it in a clear way. We don't teach the sections. We teach things in short skill-based drills instead. So, you know, I do have a difference in the program and stuff, because that is the product. But that's how I decided to market myself, not by making smuggled claims of revealed knowledge to which I'm the only person that has this, right?
Right.
If people read something in my book and they want to know, where does this come from? Okay. Well, oftentimes it's cited there where it came from, if it came from another book. But if it's ever not clear, I can be asked, okay, this thing that I wrote about here, this is what I learned from Sifu Leung Ting. This is my idea about it. Would be very transparent about it, not just saying, oh, this is the way it is. All right.
Yeah.
So there's also another fake term that floated around Europe for a long time, which was the BIU bong. The like BIU, again, it's, you know, anytime you add the word BIU to something, it's like, you know, it's not just a FAAK sound, it's a BIU FAAK, right?
Right.
It's not just a bong sound, it's a BIU bong, right? I can imagine, like, you know, I can make a whole video series, BIU PAK, BIU GAN, BIU Quan, right? If you just put BIU at the beginning, everyone's like, oh, this is the BIU version of it. It must be super advanced, right? So, there's been this thing that's floated around for the longest time, the BIU bong, right? And a lot of people are like, oh, it's the way you do the bong sao once you've learned the BUG. That's how half of the people interpret it. The other people interpret it as like a specific technique of bong sao with a BUG flavor to it, right?
Right.
And the thing is that they're actually wrong. It's piu with a P.
Right.
All right. Piu bong, which means a floating bong sao. And this is for a very rare situation. It's often in the wooden dummy, although it's presented, I think, in Sifu Leung Ting's system, I think first in BUG 2, where you're in bong sao, usually on the inside, a cross bong, a wrong bong, which is very bad. All right. You're in that position. You're vulnerable to shots of the ribs. You're on the inside. You're turned the wrong way. Whenever we're in wrong bong, we want to get out of that position as soon as possible. So there's a way where I can turn to the other side and then convert it to, for example, lapsao throat cut, right? And while I do that, if I were to drop my elbow right away, I would create an opening where my opponent can hit me. So in order to maintain the safety behind the contact point, I let the bong sao float as I move, and then when I'm on the other side, then I can lower my elbow so that I maintain that contact point rather than just dropping it right away, right? And then being open. That is the pew bong, the floating bong. And for some reasons, I think someone heard that wrong at a seminar, said pew bong. Oh, and then that's the thing. It didn't just become, so it's here's how like the conspiracy sausage is made, all right? Someone heard Si Valentin say pew bong, misinterpreted that as pew bong because he maybe explained it in BIU section 2. So like, oh, pew bong. Oh, we're in BIU. Oh, that must be it. And then instead of just looking at what he did and calling that pew bong, but they're actually doing pew bong, floating bong, they just have a misinterpretation of the pronunciation. They don't even explain it in the way that he showed it. So it's not like they have the right explanation with the wrong name. They make up an entire body of knowledge to it. That's why I say that then now around this pew bong becomes a J.R. Tolkien world that's built around it, where the pew bong has all these side characters and worlds, and the pew bong goes on the mission to Rohan and everything like that. Okay. And so where I always look at is where they take these kind of small ideas, like in Hong Kong Wing Chun, it's all just about little ideas, and they then make an entire world out of something, thinking that this means that what they're doing in Wing Chun has so much depth, because listen to how long I can talk about pew bong. And then all the side quests and characters and everything like that. It's like, bro, it's literally just about maintaining the contact point when you shift from the inside to outside. In its most common interpretation, there are other ways it can be used as well. But it is not this thing. And so that's where I watch some of these videos and I go, okay, it's wrong in terms of the fact it's claiming that there's a thing called pew bong when it's pew bong. All right. It may be wrong in its interpretation of that thing, if you're saying this is how it's taught in Hong Kong.
Right.
But then we look at it, just then, okay, it's historically inaccurate, okay, that this thing exists, or it's called this, or this thing exists in Leung Teng Wing Chun. But is it actually effective? All right. So like, okay, he got the claim wrong in terms of the epistemology of where this thing is coming from. But is it still good regardless for what it is that he's showing, right? Those are the kind of things that I'm going to talk about in the videos where I specifically discuss these things in terms of like, okay, does this make sense? Would we want to do something like this? If we were in this situation, would this make sense? Because often those claims in terms of what it is and where it's from are not correct. So then we have to then just look at the technique on its own, because he's getting the terminology wrong most of the time.
Right.
So that's my first kind of, if I have 3 pillars of issues with a lot of these type of videos, Cord is an example of that, but he's not the only one. There are many people that use a similar framework. The first one is this incorrect terminology that then becomes a thing that then grows into this huge world of stuff. And it's like, it's for example, pew bong is just a little short thing you would use to correct your students to keep them from making a mistake and keep them safe in a transition. And that's it.
Yeah.
It's not, I wouldn't write a chapter on it in my book. Okay. It would get a paragraph.
Yeah.
All right. But they have written an entire novel series on this pew bong, which is actually pew bong, which is actually a very minor thing that they've made major. And that's where I find that like they're blowing a lot of mental calories on things that are either nothing burgers,
yeah,
or are more easily solved with simpler technology, right?
Yeah.
Which then brings me to kind of the second common misunderstanding, I think, as far as a lot of these Latter-day Saints guys go, all right? And that is a misinterpretation of what they think Latsao, or quote-unquote Hong Kong Latsao, is, all right? So Latsao is a commonly heard term in Wing Chun, but I think it's one of the most misinterpreted for a couple reasons. Not because people learned it wrong, because Latsao is a suitcase term. Okay, so a suitcase term is a term like martial arts. Okay, if I say martial arts with no context, you don't know if I'm talking about a granny doing Tai Chi in the park. All right, or if we're talking about a basement fight with broken glass between, Van Damme and Tong Po, right? I mean, like both of these things are considered martial arts, right? Tai Chi granny in the park. and broken glass glued into your hand wraps to fight to the death, right? It's also martial arts, MMA, jujitsu, boxing, kickboxing, Wing Chun, you name it, right? I mean, these are all martial arts. So without context, martial arts is a suitcase term, which without any kind of clarifying context is very broad. Well, within the world of Wing Chun, the term Latsao is also a bit of a suitcase term because it can be used, depending on the context, to mean different things. Now, some styles of Wing Chun use the term Latsao only to mean one or two things. So if someone from another style of Wing Chun hears me say this, I'll be like, no, you're wrong. Latsao means, and then insert the one meaning that they use it for. All right. And what they're misunderstanding is, no, that's in your school. Your school of Wing Chun decided this is what Latsao means and nothing else. But that is an editorial decision of your school.
Right.
When you spend time talking to students of Grandmaster Yip Man or general Wing Chun students in Hong Kong, you'll find that Latsao means many, many different things depending on the context. It is a suitcase term. So anyone who's telling you Latsao means and then giving you a hard definition is displaying some version of the Dunning-Kruger effect. All right. They've only seen it presented in a certain way. So Latsao can mean can mean that you're free, that there's free of contact. Somebody's not touching, right?
Yep.
So you were once previously in contact, say sticking to your partner's arm, maybe in something called Chi Sao, right? And then suddenly your opponent pulls their arm away. And in that moment, your arm is free. That moment when your hand is free is called Latsao. It's like, could be a moment or a beat in a fight. It can also have meanings and context that mean something closer to a freestyle fight or freehand fighting, meaning that we're kind of going back and forth with a limited rule set. You can kind of do what you want. I can kind of do what I want. And we have a free hand that's punching and hitting. Maybe one hand is sticking, one hand is hitting. That can also be Latsao. All right. Latsao can mean specifically the antithesis of Chi Sao, not just that you're in contact and then you lose contact, but that we are starting without contact.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I attack you from distance. We often call that a Latsao attack, right? So it can be like a moment in a fight. It can be a mode of training, and it can be a context for a starting position. All right. And that I would consider a spectrum. You have three definitions there of Latsao: a momentary release of the hands, right? A style of training or fighting, usually more freestyle. And then a context for a starting position of no contact.
Right.
But what people don't realize is while those are three different definitions with perhaps a tiny bit of overlap, there's also a spectrum that's connecting those three things, and a lot of little things in between can also be considered Latsao. So I would suggest that non-Chinese speaking instructors are a little more cautious with assigning hyper-specific definitions to these terms.
Right.
If anything, speak more broadly. All right. So this has always been an issue for a lot of European Wing Chun people. When I say Wing Chun, I mean WT, this term Latsao, because my late Sifu created a training program that he called Latsao. And it was based on what we usually call the pack punch game. All right. So punch and pack and punch and pack, right? And it's done with one leg forward, depending on. Some people do it with full shin on shin contact. Some people do it without leg contact. Some people do it this way, that way, whatever. Some people forego the paksao and they just do it with punches. But this kind of exercise is called Latsao. And this was taught in the EWTO for many years. And it gave a bit of a bridge from the forms to Chi Sao. All right. It was like kind of something in between Chi Sao and fighting. And it was easy to get the students started on this because the framework is it's a real simple loop. And then from there, you can introduce different types of attacks, and then the student learns how to defend. So they had a hyper-specific definition of Latsao in Europe for a very long time. And it meant these specific programs done from here. That was my late Sifu's decision to call this exercise Latsao and literally call it that and say that that's what Latsao is. That was an editorial choice, all right? And then, of course, as more people started to read Leung Ting's books in the EWTO, they started to see, okay, well, it looks like Siva Leungting defines Lutzow as I'm standing here, you're standing there. We're not in contact. We're not starting from pre-contact.
Right.
So it could be that I step in and attack you preemptively, or you attack me and I defend something at distance. All right. Basically, sparring. Okay. So then people were like, well, maybe Lutzow is not this thing. Lutzow is the starting position, right? Okay. And then so what they started to do is they started to create Lutzow applications. All right. And these Lutzow applications, and I would say, and Cord definitely has this, and it's not his fault. This is like, I would venture to guess 99.9% of the WT people who are kind of on their own, doing their own version of what they learned, think this way. And I know this because I teach people online, so I know what a lot of instructors think these things mean. Okay.
Right.
So, for example, there will be a move in Chizo. Okay. Let's say the first attack. All right. Which is often incorrectly called the pull attack or Zugangriff in German. It's not a pull. Okay. And so you grab your partner's arms, you check the elbow, and you step in and give him a palm strike. Right. And that's the first attack from Punsao grab, control the elbow, step in and go boom. And you hit him with a palm. Very fast, very effective. And then, of course, there's a defense. And then people who teach sections, this leads into other things and so on and so forth. Then they go, what's the Lutzow application of that movement? Because there's a tacit implication that if we do it in Chizo, we also have to have a Lutzow application of the movement. I mean, doesn't it make sense? We're not doing Chizo with our opponent on the street. So we have to have a Lutzow meaning sparring in this context, application of this movement. So then what do these guys show? They then start in the Zhongsao, in the Mansa Wusao position. I'm here. My opponent is over there, maybe also in a Wing Chun position or maybe not in a Wing Chun position. And then this person does something to me, comes at me with a punch or a paksao or some totally complicated Wing Chun attack that no one would ever use, even in WT, to attack someone. And then when I get attacked, I apply this thing from Chizo. And that is the Lutzow application of this Chizo movement. I know you look at it differently because that's not at all how I presented it to you, because I present it much more in the Chinese way. So that's why, like, when I have my students watch this stuff, they go, what does he mean Lutzow application? And then why is he doing it at distance? Because the thing that people get wrong with this idea of Lutzow application is that almost everything we do in Chizo, all right, in application, all right, in what the Chinese would call Lutzow, in sparring, guozao, fighting, okay, you're fighting back. You're not just standing there or firing a single punch at me. You're actually grabbing and fighting back and resisting my movements, right? Most of what we need in Chizo is in that moment when you've closed the gap, but you haven't knocked your opponent down, or they block your position, or they grab your arm, or they hold, or they deflect, and now your limbs have run into their arms.
Yeah.
And then you need this Chizo idea to get around these obstructions. But that happens in an organic way in fighting. It doesn't happen that, okay, I'm here, you're over there, you give me some totally telegraphed paksao punch from half a mile away. I sit here and wait like an idiot, block it with my hand, turn, and then do some version of the first attack. And then you say, Lutzow application. Okay. These things are not. So the problem is you're taking something, a Chizo technique that's meant to be applied when you're in the dogfight. You're already fighting. That's why you have contact with the arms. A situation occurs and you use this technique based on feeling and angle and position.
Yeah.
That's how you're supposed to learn when to do it against a resisting, struggling opponent in guozao. It's not, I stand here, you stand there, fire two punches at a distance, and I go pak, first attack. And then so what happens is they're not teaching you how to apply this thing organically in fighting. They're creating a situation that doesn't exist in reality to show you the movement that they want you to apply. And it's like, while that might look cool, that situation doesn't occur. People don't attack like Wing Chun people on the streets. And Lutzow attack doesn't mean I stand here like this, you stand over there, either in Wing Chun or non-Wing Chun. I wait, You attack me, and I cobble together a move out of Section 1 Chi Sao. That is completely, that's for the Hong Kong style, that's an absurdist take.
Right.
Okay. Now, it doesn't help that in Sifu Leungting's books, he kind of does present it that way. All right. Because it's not what he actually teaches, and what he teaches, it's really supposed to be like. But what you see is, people don't know what Letzao is. So they look at his books and they create a J.R. Tolkien world out of a couple photos in Leungting's books.
Right.
And then they go, oh, well, the Hong Kong style Letzao is just you standing there and the other guy standing there. And that's not realistic. Okay. And I'm going like, and this is the definition of a straw man argument. Okay.
Yeah.
Because they have created a vision of what Hong Kong Letzao is, which is not at all what they think it is.
Yeah.
And then they show these hyper-specific techniques of Chi Sao done at distance against a street fighter who also has Wing Chun reactions. The bad guy in these exercises are always like, they're always like a boxer or a street fighter who also somehow knows Wing Chun, is going to do Lan Sao and Bong and turn. Like, I'm always going like, where's the Venn diagram of like, where does this opponent exist in the world? I want to know.
Well, that's the thing I was going to ask. Is this, or are the videos all like Wing Chun versus Wing Chun? Or is that what it is?
No.
He
Sometimes starts off like that, but it's always very like,
the minute he feels contact, he's suddenly like,
well, it's always that the attack that the guy's doing
right,
is teeing up the thing he wants to show you, which is not the Hong Kong style at all. The Hong Kong style is like, depending on the situation, I apply this movement based on what happens,
right,
and I don't go and then create. It's reverse engineering in the wrong way.
Yeah.
What you're learning in Chi Sao should be practiced to adapt to what your opponent is doing. It's not that what your opponent is doing is adapted so you can show your Chi Sao.
Yes.
And that's what I often see. And I go, this attack is created so that he can show pak first attack. And I go, but that situation inside, like, I don't know where you're going to see that. Right.
Yeah.
So that's my second thing that I noticed in his videos is a lot of misappropriation of what Hong Kong Letzao is, right? And also, like, in general, there tends to be a overblowing of these terms, like I mentioned before, with all the world building.
Mm-hmm.
And like the thing that they think is a really big deal, Letzao, right? They blow it up in a way where it's like that you're focusing, the emphasis is on the wrong syllable. Hardcore. All right. And you're making way too big of a deal out of minor things, and missing the kind of framework of the organic free adaptation that the other guy is not giving you these attacks so you can show your cheese out. Right. So that's kind of my second thing is this, the first pillar is it's the chop suey terminology used. All right. The BIU FAAKs, the BIU bongs. All right. I wonder if there's a BIU Siunum Tao. It's the secret BIU Ji Siunum Tao, right? The BIU Chigurk, the BIU long pole, right? And then so the third pillar that and I have to say Cord is not exceptional in this. He's just maybe like has more of a platform than some of these other guys, and his videos are more confident in their claims. Okay.
Right.
And it's like, if you watch it, not all the other Wing Chun Latter-day Saints in Europe are like Cord necessarily, but what he says is a lot of the stuff that a lot of those guys kind of think, because they all kind of are borrowing from the same sources that they have there, which is not really a Chinese source. If it's a Chinese source, they're looking at Leungting's book and figuring out what does he mean here, right?
Yeah.
Looking in the terminology and finding a term called kunto and going, what does that mean? Oh, it's a specific wall punch series on a wall bag. It's like, because it says boxing form in English, like that's not at all what that means. But there's a whole world building that was created around the kunto, which is a misunderstanding of a term that didn't just go down the wrong way. Someone literally made up an entire body of knowledge and appropriated that term, and then everyone just thinks it's a thing, and it's not a thing.
Yeah.
All right.
Hey, Kung Fu Genius fans. If you like what we do here, please consider supporting us on Patreon. For as little as $5 a month, you'll get early access to episodes and other goodies not posted on the Kung Fu Genius channel. With higher levels of support, you can get your name in the description, a live chat with me, or at the baller level, you even get your own personal KFG episode with me as my guest. The link to our Patreon page is in the description of this episode below. Patreons have a direct link to chat with me and get first dibs on any questions for Ask Me Anything episodes. Click on the link in the description for our Patreon page for more information, and I'll see you on Patreon.
The third, I think, issue that I have with his videos and videos like his is what is, I call this even pie chart problem. All right. And this is, and I know about this because when I was learning in Europe many years ago, there were some people who believed this. I think until Sifu Langting came and taught his tutorials. And that is that if you look at all the 6 forms in Wing Chun, okay, Siunam Tao Chum Kyu, Biuji, Mokyan Zhong, pole, and the knife, that the whole Wing Chun system represents this one round pie.
Yeah.
And that pie is evenly cut into 6 slices of those 6 forms.
Right.
And the idea is that they all interrelate with each other, obviously, because it's a system, but that they are all equally important to the system. Okay?
Mhm.
And because he'll often have these kind of pie charts where he literally goes Siunam Tao Chumki BG all that stuff, and he has this evenly split pie chart, and I look at that and I go, ooh, that is not Hong Kong style at all, because there are people that believe like they're all these fist fighting applications from the long pole.
Oh wow.
That you put in the fist fighting. So once you learn long pole, it's not just that you get the strength training and the form, and then you learn how to actually fight with that long pole versus someone else with a long pole. And if your instructor's good, they should also be able to teach you long pole versus other weapons. But most Wing Chun instructors only know the long pole versus long pole stuff, right? But then they're like, no, it's not just that the long pole is a weapon that you use against other weapons, primarily other long poles. It's that there are all sorts of secrets of fist fighting locked into the long pole that are then going to evenly seep into the Wing Chun system with an even occurrence of Siunam Tao or Chum Kyu.
Right.
Okay. And this is, as much as I don't like to be this is categorically false. Okay.
Right.
First of all, the long pole is a latter day accretion to the Wing Chun system.
Yeah.
Meaning that the Wing Chun system, its fist fighting components, were developed independently of the long pole, because a Lok Tim Pun Guan is a long pole system that exists in southern China and is taught in different styles of Kung Fu. There are even some white eyebrow styles, Bak Mei, that have Lok Tim Pun Guan. There are some styles of Hong Kun that have Lok Tim Pun Guan. It's not just Wing Chun. But if you listen to some of these guys, you would think, oh, when you learn the long pole, it's not just the long pole. Now you're going to learn all these secret fist fighting applications. Okay.
Right.
Now, most Hong Kong Wing Chun guys will tell you, hey, the pole makes you really strong. Okay. By training the long pole and doing the strength training, you get grip strength, you get forearm strength, you get stance, waist. It's kind of like CrossFit for the Qing dynasty, right?
Mhm.
So it's like a tremendous power building thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Independent of fighting with the long pole, if you understand Lok Tim Pun Guan and how it was developed traditionally against the right-handed pole, and it was originally left-handed with the narrow grip, and how it was developed, this is a brilliant way of basically deconstructing pole fighting in southern China. Lok Tim Pun Guan was created as a reaction to the more common pole fighting systems in southern China. It was created as a pole fighting system versus other pole fighting styles. It was not created with there is a secret arm lock in the long pole. And one day, Wing Chun people are going to absorb this long pole form into their style. And then they're also going to have this cool arm lock, which is also coincidentally going to follow the precepts of their style.
Right.
Okay, I cannot stress enough. Lok Tim Pun Guan was developed outside of Wing Chun. It is the only form that is an import. All the other forms were developed in-house. Siunam Tao Chum Kyu, BUG, you see, it's the same style, just in a progression. Wooden dummy, same.
Yep.
The knives, even according to Grandmaster Yip Man and New Martial Hero, based off of the fist fighting techniques. The long pole is the import. And now when you look at, like, he has a video where he says the secret arm lock technique hidden in the long pole. Okay. And it comes off as, first of all, I learned the long pole from Sifu Leung Ting. Okay. So it's not like I learned it from a guy in Buxtehude. Okay.
Yeah.
I learned the long pole from Sifu Leung Ting and from Sifu Carson Lau. All right. Who also learned from Sifu Leung Ting and Sifu Cheng, and from Sifu Elman Leung, who learned the pole from Sifu Leung Ting in the 70s. So I learned the pole from Sifu Leung Ting in a modern era. I learned a version of the pole that he used to teach in the early 70s. And I learned another version of the pole that was from his other students.
Yeah.
Okay. So 3 very solid sources of Chinese long pole from 3 really solid guys, including the guy himself.
Yes.
And I've also learned long pole from non-Wing Chun sources, namely Maxi, who I learned his version of Lokdin Bunguan. So I learned a version that was outside of Wing Chun completely to compare it to complete my knowledge. And while, yes, there are positions and postures in the long pole with the stance and the position here that if you took the pole out of your hand and put a guy's arm in there, or turn this grip into a gansao and bent your knee down, you can, if you squint your eyes enough and hope and wish, you could say, yeah, that's an arm lock. Yeah, that's a punch. Yeah, that's a kick. But this is confirmation bias.
Yeah.
All right. Because it's assuming that a pole form that was designed outside of Wing Chun has had Wing Chun movements in it before it came to Wing Chun.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
As opposed to someone who's kind of clever looks at some variations of things like arm lock or whatever and says, hey, this looks like long pole. Like the number of people who think the shin lock that we do, sometimes we press on someone's shin and put the weight on the front leg to hold them down. Oh, well, it's obviously from long pole because you see that it's from the horse stance or the front stance.
Yeah.
As opposed to, no, this is just advanced Wing Chun footwork. All right. If you want to draw a comparison, you can look at any form. Even Sifu Leung Ting told me this. He goes, look, you can take a movement from the Chum Kyu and interpret it in a way that has nothing to do with Wing Chun. For example, the lapsao grab, the move to the side, the kick, and the stepping bong, which is standard in Leung Ting Wing Chun. More classical styles of Hong Kong Wing Chun, they use the front kick, and then they go to the tapo bong. But in the Leung Ting style, you have the grab, you go to the side, you do the side kick, and then you do the stepping bong. These are multiple different things in the form that are meant to be trained in Tisao or fighting or whatever, right? The first part is the lapsao. This is the grab we use in Dengjiang, we use in the first attack, we use it everywhere. Now the side lansao is unrelated to that.
Yeah.
Okay? This is the next move. It's a setup for the side kick. And then the stepping bong is something else. But you have guys that teach like you grab the punch to the side, shift, kick, and then you step in, and that stepping bong is not a bong sao, it's actually an elbow strike.
Right.
So what they did is they take whole swaths or swathes of the choreography of the form, and they create a fighting situation so that they can do movements or beats from the form in order and say, see, that's the application.
Right.
But it's like they're looking at an abstract form and then they're just creating something that this pantomime would work against.
Yes.
And that is not how the Wing Chun forms are done. I could easily look at the long pole form and come up with ground fighting techniques, okay? I mean, like, it doesn't take that long, and I think people don't realize, where does this information come from? Hey, man, give me a section of the BIU form, all right? Like a couple sets, all right? And then tell me, what are the secret anti-Brazilian jiu-jitsu movements of this part of BIU? And if you gave me 10 minutes, I could come up with an entire world of shit. I'm like, well, actually, the scissors gan is for this and this and this and this. And if someone tries to do this arm lock on you, you can apply this and this. And you can easily look at any movements because they're broad. You have a movement here, arm is high, arm is low, arm is this way, arm is forward. It's so easy to reverse engineer a problem for which this abstract thing in the form can solve. And then to say, see, obviously there's an arm lock in the long pole form and it's hidden. And the reason why you're saying it doesn't exist is because you haven't seen it and you didn't learn it. So it's this unfalsifiable claim. I could literally, if you give me a wooden dummy form and you pick a set and then you just give me a style to fight against, I would say, yeah, see this movement here? This is against, all right? Kyokushin karate's third movement in their second form. It's so easy to create this stuff in hindsight. And I think people don't realize that this is what's going on. You have a clever Wing Chun person, you see a move, and you could say, hey, look, it's for this. And it could be. But what they're saying is, no. It's not this is a way to interpret it. This is what the move is for. That's where I take issue. Because they create a singular idea out of something, and they have the most abstract, low percentage version of what you would actually do with that movement.
Right. So something I've been wanting to ask throughout the episode, but obviously I was waiting to a point where it would seem relevant.
Right.
Whereas we're getting up to forms, right?
Yeah.
Now, and taking as example my favorite Streisand effect lover, who legit kind of, left the organization, gave himself gold stripes, and his Chum Q form has whole extra bits in it.
Right. I think all his forms do.
Yeah.
Not this guy here, someone else.
Yes. We're not talking about Cord here. We're talking about someone else. Because I would imagine like you said, you don't really watch a lot of this stuff, but you're kind of catching up with it like that.
Well, I get it pushed in my face. And then people saying like, hey, what do you think about this? It's like, I don't have an opinion on it. Unless you force me to.
Like, so we've got these three pillars here, but like how prevalent is that kind of then just adding like whole extra movements into something as opposed to having the imaginary BIU Sunim Tao, but like that's not beyond the realms of possibility in this context, right? But like actually having guys that are like, oh well, this is how we're gonna, distance ourselves from this thing, and then on the gold plates, apparently there's now 3 or 4 extra moves or a whole extra section, to something where we can at least agree that for the most part across even lineages, like the Chum Q and the Sunim Tao are very similar. They all have the same amount of sections, you know what I mean? The movements.
Well, they're constructed. They're constructed with an end in mind. You have the feeling, as opposed to like kind of being kind of ad hoc and made up on the spot. So I know what you mean. So there's another guy, kind of another Latter-day Saint of European Wing Chun, and he has added all this crazy stuff to his forms. Right now, I saw a lot of that stuff years ago. What it seems like, it's like, here's some more complex applications. I cannot justify these complex applications in the framework of the way the forms are currently.
Right.
But now if I start adding to the forms, I can now show you all these other applications, right? And so this is, in my opinion, a misinterpretation of Wing Chun, because what is greater, okay? The number of fighting specific situations you could be in, or the number of techniques you could use? It's a difficult question to answer, all right? Because there are lots of situations you could end up in, all right? And there's lots of different techniques. If you just change a little something, want to call it another technique, there's a lot. So what does that say? There are lots of different situations and lots of different techniques that can be done. All right. Then you have a style like Wing Chun, which is flexible because we're not like doing specific choreography with our opponent. We're trying to flexibly apply our movements in a freestyle kind of way, depending. Siva Leung Ting would say moving according to how your opponent moves or changing according to how your opponent changes, as opposed to saying, this is what's going to happen. Watch me do my BIU FAAK, right?
Yeah.
It's so easy to say, hey, you know what's missing in the Chum Q form? It's missing a high line strike defense from this angle, or it's missing this thing from here, or it's missing a kick defense. And then going, I need to add that to the Chum Q so it's in there.
Right.
And I think it's more effective to teach the students simple movements, simple forms, and then have them focus most of the time on sparring and training and learning how to apply a principle-based way of fighting and adapted to a myriad of situations in actual partner practice, then going, okay, all the stuff you're missing in terms of application, we're not going to do it by actually applying. Right. We're just going to add more shit to the forms. So now your wooden dummy, because if you think about it, does the wooden dummy handle every single possible angle of attack or whatever? No. All right. Because the wooden dummy has a very specific goal within its framework. So you could say, hey, you know what? There's no tackle defense in the wooden dummy form, and then have to, our Sifu Chris Collins, who's a friend, I've met him a few times, WT instructor in Hong Kong. He had a great video the other day. He had a reel where he goes, he's doing some kind of WT on the wooden dummy, and he goes, I feel something's missing. He's doing like Kwansao, Gansao, first attack, moving around, flowing a little bit. He says, oh, that's right, the legs. Because he's also a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. And then he drops down on the wooden dummy leg and puts it into like a leg lock position and starts spinning around and doing all little rolls from Jiu-Jitsu and stuff. I thought that was really cool, right?
Mhm.
But you also see like, you could like do like weird anti-grappling or grappling stuff with the wooden dummy legs spinning around, right? So now is that missing from the wooden dummy form? Or is that a matter of learning those things with a partner?
Right.
You see?
Yeah.
And so it's easy to say like, hey, the Sunum towel, the problem with Sunum towel, it has no footwork. Well, I mean, it's by design. Okay. So now you start adding it and you start doing all this other stuff. And it's like, could you not have just taught that extra footwork through normal footwork training, perhaps footwork training with a partner, rather than make the forms more complicated?
Mhm.
Because as simple as the forms are, it's still challenging for some people to learn them.
Yeah.
Is the solution really to add more shit to all of the forms?
Well, to be fair, the Sunum towel does need to be a bit more ostentatious.
We need handstands and backflips in the Sunum towel, right? So yeah, and so I would say even with the example you brought up, you have these kind of funny terms that are taught that aren't really there. You have a misinterpretation of the Hong Kong Lutzao framework, and you have that even pie thing where it's like, now that you learn pole, your Wing Chun fist fighting will be polified, right? Not from the strength training and power and core training you get from the pole, or learning how to use the pole in different angles, which can enhance some of your Chi Sao ideas, but because there's specific fist fighting techniques hidden in the long pole that you just don't see. For sure, you can apply the knife techniques unarmed.
Yeah.
And no one's going to argue with that there. But they believe that all of this stuff was reverse engineered first.
Right.
And there's nothing to suggest that. And that's all I got to say about that. All right, peeps. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Kung Fu Genius. As always, don't forget to subscribe to the Kung Fu Genius. Hit that bell for notifications. Don't forget to support us on Patreon or here on YouTube with memberships. And as always, I'll see you guys next time.
Word is I'm a kung fu genius. Technique speaks for me, not lineage. Forget Jet Li, cause I'm the one. Many call me seafood, but to you I'm sea gung. And I produce masters. You surpassed us. Your kung fu stiffer than corpse and caskets. City Wing Chun is the house I built. Violate the gate and your blood gets spilt. Alex, Richter, always the victor.
All right, everyone. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Kung Fu Genius. As always, don't forget to subscribe to the Kung Fu Genius. Hit that bell for notifications.
Fortifications.
All right. There we go.
Ooh.
It's one of those days. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I'm impressed that you managed to actually get that through the second time. Normally, when you make one mistake, that's it. We're done for the next 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
that's actually a genuine comment.
I feel
Great.
like it's a little bit of an insult thrown in
I
there.
can't help this. My accent. I can't help it. All right, peeps. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, what were we discussing? We were critiquing
Critiquing
online Wing Chun videos.